wanted to introduce to you the KI anchor and our traffic reporter, Erica Hardpole, who has now been married. She's got a new name that we're going to have to get used to. And she's going to moderate our panel in the question and answer session. Erica is part of the KI TV No Tech Zone team that promotes the dangers of cell phone use while driving. So I'm going to let Erica introduce all of her panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice and full now. That was yummy. So my name is Erica Brennis. I literally changed my name on air yesterday. So it's still Erica Harpold on Facebook because Facebook makes you wait. But so you can find me on Facebook, Erica Harpold or Erica Brennis. Now I have to get used to it too. I've already introduced myself, Erica Harpold, like 4 times today. So it'll take some getting used to. But thanks so much for having me here. This has been really incredible. Austin is actually my hometown. And so doing the traffic in Austin has been a real treat the last almost 2.5 years. Just obviously we're in the midst of some big change in our city. So, and obviously right now with no texting and that sort of thing and distracted driving, we're in another big change too. So let me introduce our panel. This is finally your chance to be able to ask some questions. I know people are ready for that, but Reagan Terrell oversees the global safety, security, health, and environment programs for ExxonMobil. Want to go ahead and just raise your hand so everyone knows which one is which. So before the phrase distracted driving became part of our lexicon, ExxonMobil was the first American company to ban cell phone use in cars back 10 years ago. So in 2004, Reagan says the policy was an outgrowth of ExxonMobil's core value of safety. Reagan was instrumental in developing and deploying computer-based distracted driving training materials at ExxonMobil. So pretty good stuff there. And I'm going to hopefully get this right. Chris Generali, he's executive president of All My Sons Moving and Storage. Headquartered in Dallas, All My Sons operates in 60 locations across the U.S. and in Mexico City. And Chris says the family-owned business emphasizes safety. And in fact, All My Sons Austin is one of KITV's No Texting community partners. All My Sons banned the use of all driver handheld and electronic devices during vehicle operation for its 1,500 employees in 2010. And then to my left, Amanda Ciampi, as she's told me to call her, but it's Ciampi. I know that because of Chianti wine, right? So Amanda is Director of Citizenship and Sustainability at AT&T. She develops community-focused strategies and programs in the Western U.S. and is part of AT&T's It Can Wait campaign. That's a national program that launched in 2009 that asks people to pledge not to text and drive, and so far almost 5 million people have taken that pledge. All AT&T employees with a company-issued phone, which is about 250,000 people, are required to sign a code of contact that bans texting behind the wheel. And then earlier you got to meet Dave Teeter with the National Safety Council and attorney Todd Clement, who you met earlier. They're also on our panel. I know lots of people have questions. So we're going to first start with ExxonMobil, the first company, as I said, to implement a distracted driving policy about 10 years ago in the U.S. Each panel member will have a chance to come talk, so go ahead and kick us off.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And first off, on behalf of ExxonMobil, I would like to thank the Texas Department of Transportation for the opportunity to address you on this very, very important topic. It's with a sense of honor and with humility that I have the privilege of representing how the men and women of our company are approaching this subject. The risks we've heard this morning, and you've heard many times, they are real, they are pervasive in our society, and they continue to result in serious and often tragic and life-altering consequences, not only for the drivers and passengers involved in these accidents, but also their friends, family, and loved ones alike. We at ExxonMobil recognize that the actions leading to distraction while driving are not limited to one's personal time and leisure time behind the wheel, but are also applicable to those driving in the course of their business activity. As responsible corporate citizens, we take a proactive approach in addressing those risks with our employees, our contractors, our business partners, wherever we do business. Our robust practices have enabled our best-in-class vehicle safety performance. So in providing you an overview of how we approach the subject, I'd like to read for you an excerpt of our corporate-wide cell phone requirement. It is ExxonMobil Corporation's policy to conduct its business in a manner that protects the safety of employees, others involved in our operations, customers, and the public. Safely operating in a motor vehicle requires a driver's full attention. Based on studies, many of which you've heard about today as well, the use of cellular telephones, handheld or hands-free, or other communication devices while driving detracts from that attention. Accordingly, the following requirements apply to all employees while driving for the purpose of conducting company business. Drivers may not use cellular telephones or other communication devices in vehicles except when the vehicle is properly parked in a rest area, designated parking area, or other safe location. This includes placing outgoing calls, checking messages, and receiving incoming calls. Passengers as well may only use a cellular telephone or other communication device only if the conversation is not a distraction to the driver. So as I stated earlier, and you heard this policy was put into place June 1st, 2004, 10 years ago this month. This marks the 10-year anniversary of our implementation. Although many areas of our company around the world, we are a worldwide operation, had other policies in place a few years earlier than this. This policy solidified our position and expectations for our worldwide workforce, banning the use of cell phones or other communication devices while driving on company business. However, we know it would be too simplistic and unrealistic to stand here today and tell you that the implementation of our corporate policy, written in plain text, communicated, understood by all employees, would be the panacea for the risks of safely driving on our roadways. The implementation of our cell phone policy was but one milestone along our overall safety journey, a never-ending journey at ExxonMobil. This journey to safety is really a journey to a safety culture. This culture is grounded in our corporate vision of a workplace where nobody gets hurt, and is sustained by a value that safety governs everything we do. You'll notice that I mentioned safety as a value and not as a priority. And as stated by our chairman and echoed throughout our organization, it's not enough to make safety a priority or the focus of a specialized team. It must become a value and part of the organizational culture that infuses every activity every day. And this is supported by key statements in our safety credo, which says no business objective is so important that it will be pursued at the sacrifice of safety. As well, a job is well done only if it is done safely. This credo was infused in me from my first day on the job over 27 years ago as a young engineer, and repeated and reinforced thousands of times over the course of my career. Now, to make these corporate policies, procedures, and practices effective and vibrant and really alive in the organization, moving people from an attitude of compliance to a belief that the requirements are in their best interest, then it requires more than just the policy. The policy is but one part in our overall systematic approach. And over 20 years ago, ExxonMobil took the action to wholly reorient our company to put safety of people, facilities, and the environment at the heart of everything that we do. And we created an Operations Integrity Management System, also known as OIMS in our corporation. It's a rigorous framework comprised of 11 elements designed to identify hazards, manage safety, security, health, and environmental risk. But rather than start with a number of new procedures and processes, we began with the people in mind. This OIMS system is enabled by belief that leadership influences culture, and culture drives behavior. We established as our very first element of the framework management leadership, commitment, and accountability. Our leaders set the expectations, they build structures that support the safety efforts, including the policies, communication, education, assessment, measurement, and enforcement, as well as continuous improvement, and they teach others to do so as well. Now, in addition, we know that the risk profile from both internal and external factors is ever changing. And as technology and cultural norms change, innovations in processes and practices mature, we must be both proactive and responsive. Thus, our OIMS elements include monitoring, benchmarking, and measurement, all of our aspects of safety performance. And while we take pride in our safety systems, we cannot become complacent or comfortable. To get where we need to be on this safety journey, to where nobody gets hurt, continuous improvement is essential. And so I'd like to share with you an example of our continuous improvement specific to vehicle safety that we undertook recently. And this was to further address the dangers of distracted driving. So in an effort to improve safety on the road, the United Nations marked 2011 through 2020 as the decade of action for road safety. And ExxonMobil is contributing to that effort. We enhanced our defensive driving training program with a course that teaches drivers to detect and avoid other drivers on the road who may be distracted. We partnered with Smith System Driver Institute to develop a custom training which is available to all of our ExxonMobil employees, our contractors, and their family members. While we had a number of programs and systems in place, most were focused on our own drivers and their need to minimize their source of distraction. And while that's important, we recognize the need to focus on the risks posed by this increasingly distracted driving public. This approach complements our existing programs and reinforces the need to mitigate our own source of distraction. And it introduces techniques to identify other distracted drivers and address those risks that they pose. By recognizing the possible distracted driving situations and behaviors where others may be distracted, we can take actions to protect ourselves and others. So to summarize, let me reiterate, it's a journey. We're on that journey to safer roadways, a journey where everyone makes it home safely. Mothers and fathers, friends and family, arriving home for those special occasions and everyday celebrations of life. Our part of the journey is rooted in our safety culture. It's empowered by the commitment of our leaders and guided by sound principles and procedures and strengthened by the spirit of continuous improvement. And we're pleased to be a part of this journey in the great state of Texas. Thank you.
And Chris, if you'll come up and speak next.
Good afternoon. So I came to this with our fleet director, and I said, listen, wouldn't you prefer to talk to our fleet director about when you're talking about safety? And we kind of came down to maybe I could give some insight from the business perspective, some of the challenges that fleet directors have, getting it through the executive branch, okay? And let me just briefly tell you a little bit, and you guys may or may not know anything about All My Sons Moving. We're the nation's largest privately owned local moving company. So predominantly what we do is from origin to destination, day in and day out. We handle about 132,000 shipments a year. The other challenge that we're dealing with, and we've got a lot of DOT officers here, is we are not predominantly dealing with CDL, so professional drivers. We've got drivers that we're training on commercial motor vehicles, so vehicles over 10,000 pounds, that, some of these men and sometimes women have never had any training. So we're dealing with a couple of different things. So what we decided to do years ago, and we actually had a federal agent that came in and did some consulting with us with, the Department of Transportation. We just started to implement a policy back in late 2010. So we banned all handheld devices. Now, it's one thing to set a policy in place, and it's another thing to see if it's enforced. And I think that's a challenge that every corporation has. It's one thing to put it on paper, and it's another thing to have the reality to understand how to implement it. We did implement that, but we also had to change the way our managers and other people look at our business. So like any business, we're constantly driving and pushing our product. We've got schedules, and if anybody's ever had anybody moved here locally, ever, right? You want to know where your movers are, why they're not there on time. So from operations standpoint, we had to make a lot of changes to our managers. So the beautiful thing is we also had a fleet director come in most recently, not recently, but back in 2013. His background was from large fleet, much larger than ours. And we implemented onboard recording to all of our trucks. Let's say we tried to in the beginning. There was a huge challenge. And some of you that are in business, the first thing was the spend. I mean, we were going to spend close to $1 million, and that was something that wasn't going to easily be done. The second part, and I think you said it so eloquently, is these are onboard recording devices. So the first thing that came up from our executive panel is that's fantastic. It's safety, it's fantastic, but it's also recording everything the driver does. It's a reality. The executives, well, that's good, but that could be bad, right? Because it's going to show the braking pattern. As Walter's shown me, who's our fleet director here, it's going to literally show the direction of the truck if something happens. Well, that was a huge challenge. But to mitigate that, we went on to explain the differences of the liabilities of meeting somebody like this in court. It's definitely not worth it, right? The savings to our insurance premiums, because the insurance company, and you know, when you're a large fleet, there's only a few large carriers that carry your transportation insurance. You definitely need to be careful there. So as we started to look at the savings, and things that aren't really directly related to distracted driving like fuel, it was pretty easy once we attacked it the right way to understand and implement the spend. So now what we've got is we've got a fleet equipped. We've got roughly about 400 trucks and 500 drivers. We do have 1,500 employees, but they're not all drivers because we do other things. But now what we've got the ability to do, and we're still training on it. It's been a long process to get this. All of our trucks are running onboard recording. Every single one of our units has a one-touch GPS so that the driver with one touch can get directions without looking at the screen read to him on where he's going. So we can type in destination, we can type in origin. So not only has it made us safer, it's made us much more efficient, much more efficient. Another challenge we had is our operations managers wanting to text the drivers. Where are you? Get to your next job, do this. We had to put a stop to that. It's against policy, but it's human nature, it's habit. They're used to it in their own life, right? Your wife says, hey, you better get the bread when you come home. And by the way, where are you? Same thing. So we have now the ability for the actual truck to read out the text to the men. So we can do a fleet-wide text, and we do that constantly, whether it's hours of service or a 30-minute mandatory break, or anything that we need to do to identify to that driver we need to get something across without dialing him. Another thing that's kind of unique is a lot of people talk about spotting and using spotters, and some of you guys that aren't in the trucking business, that's just utilizing your second person in the passenger seat, to help you back a truck up. But we've also gone a step further and utilized that spotter for right turns, and if they do have to make a phone call, if it's an emergency, it needs to be through that person. It does not need to be through the driver. I would love to see a policy where the state of Texas implemented something even stronger, because I do believe that without conditioning, it's not going to happen. Without penalties, it's not going to happen. And listening to some of these stories today and having children from 22 down to 7 myself, I was almost in tears sitting there going, what are you doing? But, I mean, that's what grabs somebody. When you think of your own child and that protective nature comes into place, you know, I can walk through walls. And when I think about protecting my children or somebody I love, there's just nothing too short. And the founders of our company made that clear a long time ago, safety first. And I think that that's the driving philosophy now. Nobody's perfect. We're evolving. We're definitely evolving as a company, and we're evolving as humans as well. And like we've said, this technology is sort of taken over. I wish I could say that I have never texted and drove, never answered an email, but it is a Pavlovian response. You think instantly you have to handle things. So at all my sons, those are some of the things we put in place. There were a lot of challenges, a lot of executives and people that didn't want to do it. They were worried about the money. They were worried about the training. There are some other things that are in place that you can't get away from, which I think are fantastic. That, like I said, that unit's recording everything. So if that driver starts to drive too early, it gets it. And, you know, there's no way around it. There's no workarounds when you're doing electronic onboard recording. And I know that's going to become, you know, between that and logs, the way everybody has to do it. So anyway, like I said, briefly, I'm not a safety expert. I would love to learn more from everybody here, and every time I go to something that's kind of out of my comfort area, I learn something. But I just want to tell you guys thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity here. Thank you.
And Amanda, if you want to go ahead, your turn.
Hey, also, AT&T has a company-wide, fleet-wide ban on using any mobile device while operating a company vehicle. But because we are a phone carrier, we feel that we really do have a pivotal role. It is a real opportunity where we can play in this space. So that's why in 2009, our CEO made the public commitment to educate our consumers on the dangers of texting while driving in particular. So in 2010, we took it a little bit further and we developed the It Can Wait campaign. And many of y'all might have seen some of our commercials, our PSAs. You might have seen it on the bottom of your bill, or if you're ever on hold with us, you hear someone talking about the dangers of texting while driving. It really is embedded in every piece of the fabric of our company, from the chairman's announcements, kind of all the way down to our company stores and to our fleet. In 2011, we launched the Drive Mode application, and this personally is one of the things that I'm the most proud of. If you have an Android or BlackBerry device, and hopefully soon also an Apple device, if you download our Drive Mode application, which is free for AT&T customers, other carriers have one, doesn't matter whose you have, just get somebody's. And as soon as your car, at least in ours, as soon as you go over 25 miles an hour, Drive Mode will prevent you from receiving or sending a text. Same thing with voice calls. You're the person who's trying to call you or the person who's trying to text you will receive a nice message that says something like, I'm driving right now, I will respond when I can do so safely. There's some safeguards in there, so you can always dial 911, and you can pre-program up to 5 numbers that can always be dialed, just as a kind of backup safeguard. But in general, it makes it impossible to text while drive, to call while drive, and so it's kind of been our flagship offering, in the texting while driving and distracted driving space. So since then, that was 2011. In 2012, we decided to make September 19th a National Day of Action of Texting While Driving. And on that first day, we went into it, and we had 200,000 people that had taken the pledge via groups like TextDot and other businesses. They had taken the pledge not to text and drive. After that first event, the first September 19th, we had over 1 million people across the country through different events at high schools and you name it, say that they will not text while drive, that no pledge is worth a life. And since then, we're now up to nearly 5 million pledges of people who have, again, said they wouldn't text while drive. But we really want to make it more about just that commitment. It needs to be more than just some verbal words. So that's why we've implemented things like our Drive Mode application. So most of our phones that we sell are preloaded with Drive Mode. If not, you can download it from the BlackBerry or Android App Store. And I encourage all of y'all to do it if you hadn't already. And so, like I said, it's been implemented throughout our company, and we have one of the largest private fleets in the world, in the country, actually. So with that, we think comes quite a bit of responsibility, and we have implemented distracted driving classes and embedded that in our defensive driving courses. We've again implemented a policy that prohibits the use of any type of mobile device behind the road. We've, like All My Son, we do have some GPS technology that makes it as safe as possible for our fleet drivers to operate, because we do realize they do need to rely on that GPS. In some of our company-owned stores, we've integrated it for our consumer-facing employees so they can talk with customers when they come in about It Can Wait, the dangers of texting while driving. When you come in and get a phone, a lot of them will come with an It Can Wait dust cloth, or you might have seen the It Can Wait thumb bands. And we're really trying to just spread the message and get the message out there of the dangers of texting while driving. In 2012, you might have been surprised to see that we had some commercials with some of our competitors. It's probably the only time that you will ever see this. But we've realized that the issue and the danger is bigger than AT&T. It's bigger than any one company. So we need to work with all of your businesses. We need to work with groups like TextDot, because it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a combination of activism and legislation and education to really change behavior, because this is something, I kind of think of this as the drinking while driving cause of our generation. This is something that has been embedded us, especially many of the adults who think that we can do so responsibly. It's surprisingly easier to change, not surprisingly, but it's easier to change the behavior of teenagers. For them, a lot of times, this is a no-brainer. But we've found that commuters, for example, have 50% of them have said that they text while drive. And the number is actually declining for the youth in the surveys that we've conducted. So that's essentially kind of the high-level view of what AT&T is doing. Happy to take questions afterwards. Yes?
For real. What is the status of the iPhone issue and the apps? Because it's the one biggie that does not have an effective blocking technology.
It's true, and I hope that if you would invite me back in 3 months, I would have a different message for you, but that's about all I can say about it.
But we still believe there is hope.
I strongly believe there is hope.
Very good.
Yes, that's good.
And we obviously got to hear from Dave and Todd earlier, and it's obviously something that a lot of people want to talk about. I actually sent a tweet earlier when Todd was speaking that said the DWD is the new DWI, and I said that if it's something along the lines of how people who were texting and driving had a slower response than people who were drunk driving, and I've gotten like over 40 retweets, which is pretty incredible. So it's something that people are definitely talking about. Use that hashtag too, that's really helpful. So now it's your turn to ask the questions to our experts. There's some microphones that will be passed around. Definitely find a microphone to do that, and we'll go ahead and open up the floor. I see one hand.
This question is Ms. Gianni. ETT has a very strong presence at the legislature in Texas. What role did you all play in the prior 2 sessions to help advance the cause of text messaging ban, including the role that you may or may not have played with the governor? And what role did you play in the next session?
So we've partnered with quite a few different legislators to try to pass a statewide ban, because from AT&T's perspective, we would much rather have a statewide ban than kind of city ordinances that are patchwork. As you drive across the state, you're not sure kind of what the legislation is. So for example, just last year, and again in the upcoming months, we'll partner with Craddock to do some distracted driving awareness. We have a simulator similar to what you saw outside. So we've done some different events with them, and we do have a strong presence at the Capitol with our kind of external affairs group, and they're strong advocates for the ban. I'm not sure. I can check. If you want to connect with me afterwards, I can find out and get back to you, but I'm not sure what we've done with the governor.
Sorry, I wouldn't have otherwise spoke had that question not been asked, but I feel passionately about this that I need to stand up and say something. I'm Kate Huddleston with Representative Tom Craddock's office. My boss is the author of the statewide ban on texting while driving and has worked on it for the last 2 sessions with AT&T. They have been the most supportive company ever. I mean, no other wireless company has come to the mat like they have. And any allegations that they were involved in trying to get this legislation vetoed or not passed are erroneous, false, and totally inappropriate.
Yeah, if I understand the questions are, what about phone use while stopped in traffic? And the second one was any involvement from mothers against drunk driving. The first question comes up a lot from employees when companies put bans in place. And to be very frank, if you're using a phone while stopped in traffic, you're not much of a risk to anybody. The problem is, and I think it was well explained by the 2 speakers just before lunch, we can't mediate our behavior that well. Okay, so you're in the middle of a really serious phone call, or you're in the middle of some type of text exchange, and all of a sudden the traffic stops moving. Most of us are probably not going to drop the phone. We just can't mediate that behavior. So the vast majority of companies that I'm aware of, it's kind of an all or nothing. In other words, they put total bans in place that includes any form of cell phone usage when the car is in drive. So the only exception would be if they're pulled over and the car is in park. In fact, some of them spell it out that way. And I think that's probably the best policy. Secondly, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, we know them pretty well. We actually share an office in DC. They have been very singularly focused on the issue of drunk driving for the past 30 years, and I don't really see that changing. There's been a lot of pressure for them to start talking about drugged driving, especially with marijuana being legal in a couple of states now. And they're debating that right now. But I think as far as them getting involved in distracted driving, that's probably not going to happen. Although they were very instrumental in helping to set up Focus Driven, Advocates for Self-Free Driving. They even gave us their bylaws to use, and Focus Driven got incorporated very, very quickly as a result of help from MAD. So they're helping a lot, but I don't think you'll see any direct engagement just because of their singular focus.
And I have a quick follow-up question, and just, can any Austin police, from my understanding, if you are at a stop, a dead stop, you can be on your phone? Does anyone?
Yeah, what about from a legal standpoint?
I've asked a number of traffic officers before, because I get this question a lot, and I've always been told if you're at a dead stop, but you have to immediately put your phone down. But again, it's the...
Yeah, the answer to that would vary state to state, and I just don't know what Texas is.
And one of the, Todd, you may be able to speak to this, but we were speaking with a trooper earlier about someone who was charged with texting and driving, and it's not like we had a texting and driving law. So in the end, if you caused a wreck, would it matter?
Yeah, because there is not a specific statewide law, as we all know, against texting and driving. We're one of 5 states only that don't have that law. But it doesn't keep our good officers out here from charging somebody with criminally negligent homicide, manslaughter, things like that. And we're seeing it done. It's not just a theoretical possibility. In fact, in connection with the Woodson Ragsdale case, there was a criminal conviction. And it is happening more and more. And that kind of explains why we're having an underreporting of distracted driving. Everybody now, as a matter of common sense, knows that if you're in an accident and something bad happens while you're texting or on your cell phone, that didn't happen. It's kind of like, officer, how many beers, have you had any drinks tonight? No. Well, how many beers do you have? 2. We're turning that into distracted driving as well, and that's why this is particularly underreported. No fault at all of our officers. They don't have the tools to really establish it.
Okay. Next question.
You hit a good point there. I mean, one of the things that bothers me with what we do is that every crash that I've been part of it, I've been helping involve, there's always been a distraction. And as long as it's labeled as an accident and it's distraction, it's okay. It's just a ticket. So what is it going to take from us as a group, push for laws that punish distracting driving, like a drunk driving law? I mean, they should be. I mean, there is no justification of somebody's eating. Forget about being on the cell phone or eating or playing with music, being distracted while driving. What is it going to take for us as a community, as civilians, to push something to wake up lawmakers to create a law for distracted driving?
You want to go on that, or you want? Let me just comment real quickly on that. One approach to that, and I think that's why all of you in this room have so much impact. Many times legislation follows public opinion, it doesn't precede it. And to the point that you all can educate employees about the dangers of distracted driving, put policies in place that prevent them from using phones and being involved in other distractions while driving, and especially, turn them into advocates. And most of us who stop using cell phones while driving quickly recognize many, many more people on the roads driving distracted than we recognized before, because we're not distracted anymore. So we see it now, we see it even more. So we turn into advocates. And the more advocates we can get, the more it's going to be much easier in Austin to get laws passed when we've got public opinion behind those laws. Now, I know that isn't the only answer. There's other things that can be done. But, boy, I tell you what, the employer community led the way on seatbelts. They led the way, I think, on drunk driving in a lot of ways. And all of your employees have families at home and friends, and the message spreads, and that's just a great way to get this thing started.
I'd like to follow up on that, and I'm sure that, Dave, you're probably already working on this. Another thing, if you go back a decade or more, children were instrumental. And unfortunately, I used to smoke cigars, and my children were instrumental in reminding me that's not good for you. And I have a lot of, I think it starts with education, too. I think that the new generation is going to be much more tech savvy, much more driven to utilize it. So I think that in the elementary and up, if we start educating these children to remind their parents, because that's one effective way is your child not liking it. I had a lot of buddies that I'd say, well, come on, let's have a cigar. No, if my daughter sees that, she's going to flip out. So I'm not going to do it. I think that would be effective, the child in the back saying, listen, what are you doing? You're driving me around and you're texting. And I think that we should drive a little bit harder to drive that into schools and get that message across, because I think children are the one tool that's instrumental to the parent, because those instincts kicked in to remind them. And I think that's something that's very effective. And I don't know, where you stand on that as far as the education and the public school district.
Well, I think it's huge, and you also made me think of something. I frequently say to parents that have young pre-driving kids at home, I say to them, the day's going to come when they're going to move to the driver's seat. And trust me, I've been there. You're going to be scared to death. And as I mentioned earlier, it'll probably be the riskiest time in their life, the first year or so after they get their licensure. And you're going to have this kid who's probably addicted to cell phone use, which they all are, and you're going to not want them to use that phone while driving. Now, how's that going to work if for the previous 16 years they've been sitting in the back seat watching you do it? And I think a lot of good stuff, and actually AT&T has had a lot to do with that. A lot of good stuff is happening in the school systems, especially around teens and texting. We probably need to go a little bit further into the talking issue as well, but I think we're doing a pretty good job with those folks. But we got to set an example as adults, especially adults of young children, or parents of young children.
Did you want to chime in also? No. Okay. Good. Next question.
I was just going to answer the question. I Googled it for everyone. The Austin texting ban does allow it to be you to text at stoplights, so we need to fix that. But also, within a week or two, as reported on your station at KI, the Austin City Council is taking up a handheld cell phone ban. So if you want to let everyone know to support that as well, that'd help.
Why would you not pass a cell phone ban, right? Next question. Anyone?
Todd, I guess this question is for you. I see that there's probably, the reason that I see that a lot of companies are not implementing any specific policies is probably because they haven't been hit. And they do have insurance, and as you indicated, rarely does punitive damages come into play. I'm curious, have you actually seen any cases that the insurance was not enough and the employer was actually hit?
Absolutely. There are situations. Well, okay, first off, most of you fleet owners are your own insurers. And so this is coming out of your pocket. But let's talk about the other situation. Absolutely. I have seen situations now where insurance companies are denying liability for punitive damages. And it puts you in a situation that if you're a broke company, you're fine. You can't get blood from a turnip. But if you have value in your company, you are going to be looking at writing a check, and it does happen. The single worst verdict or most dramatic verdict was the verdict down in the Valley, Coca-Cola case, where indeed there was a, Dave, help me on numbers. What was the number?
21 million.
And 21, and how much was the punitive aspect?
I didn't have the breakout.
Okay, so it's like 21 million, 10 million compensatories, and another 10 million or so in punies. Now let me tell you about the case real briefly, because it wasn't mine. The case involved a Bluetooth driver that I believe was a stoplight case or something, pretty clear liability, but she was talking on Bluetooth. The whole theme of the case became, she said if Coca-Cola would have told me not to use my cell phone, I wouldn't have used it, and indeed I wouldn't have been distracted at the time of the accident. It was not a catastrophic injury, ladies and gentlemen. It was of course, any injury to anyone is catastrophic, obviously, but it was not a quadriplegic, it wasn't a brain injury. It was an orthopedic injury, it was an operated back. And those were the numbers that came down in the case. If you'll go to the NSC website, again, and look at distracted driving and go to the employer white paper, you will see listings of relatively benign cases that turn out big verdicts. There are also, anybody that wants to email me at clement@clementfirm.com, I will give you a comprehensive listing as of 2012 of 5 or 6 big Texas verdicts on some of them really benign cases. And I will also tell you, here's the final message I give you. It's not the public verdicts that are important here. Lawsuits are kind of like the iceberg that sunk the Titanic. You only hear about a very small number. Most of the most significant lawsuits are settled for a confidential sum that no one can talk about to protect the families and to protect the company to some degree. And so you won't learn about them. I will tell you that if you asked most insurance companies what keeps them awake at night and creates a situation where they really cannot plan for it from an actuarial standpoint, they will tell you it's the distracted driving case.
Let me make one comment on that, and then this lady's had her hand up. Another reason that companies would be hesitant about a policy is obviously a concern about productivity or customer service or some way that their business is going to suffer because they've built all these business practices around using cell phones. I got to tell you, we have been shocked, literally, by some of the research we've gotten back on that issue. We polled, we got answers from 2,000 of 10,000 members a few years back, and of that, about a fourth of them, about 500, had total ban cell phone policies. We asked that group how many have experienced a negative impact on their business, and only 6 companies, 6 out of 469, thought there'd been a negative impact. The vast majority, 90%, thought there'd been no impact, but 10% of the companies, or 9%, thought they'd actually had a positive impact on productivity. We did a Fortune 500 study a year later. We got the same results. The vast majority of companies are seeing no impact on their business. Those that do, on a scale of about 9 to 10, it's a favorable impact. So we think these calls are urgent. We think these business calls are really important. I remember I used to pick up the phone and call the office because I was bored and I wanted to talk to somebody. And we talked business on the phone, but there was no appointment, there was no agenda, there was no expected outcome, and the person I was talking to back at the office had work to do. The folks at Abbott said, we got 20,000 employees that just stopped doing that around the world. Do you think maybe our productivity went up? It's been a very, very pleasant surprise. I know I was surprised. I would have sworn that when I hung up my phone, it was going to have an impact on my productivity. I'm telling you, it didn't. It changed the way my day goes a little bit. I spend more time stopping on long trips and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's not changed productivity one iota. Now, let's let this lady ask her question. Sorry about that.
Thank you. My name is Rondella Hawkins with the City of Austin. I just wanted to give a brief update on the City Council did pass a resolution. They've established a distracted driving steering committee to update our no texting while driving ordinance. It's outdated, and the working group is scheduled to develop their recommendations to City Council August 1st, or actually the August 7th council meeting. So I just wanted to clarify, we are in the process of gathering information, developing recommendations to the City Council. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Robbie, and I'm from TxDOT, and this question is for Exxon. I wanted to know, was there a particular incident that led to your ban of cell phones in 2004? And then my second part is, has your ban been, updated with technology constantly changing?
Okay, thanks for the question. So the first question, if I understood it, was there a particular incident? And secondarily, have we updated our policy with the advances in technology and innovation? The first answer is no. It was born out of, we saw the overwhelming research that was coming out. We approached it from the side of, this is a personal safety issue. And we also had various parts of our company around the world that were starting to take proactive action that, hey, if this is not coming down from corporate, we're going to step out here. So this was another opportunity to harmonize our approach and give one consistent message across the organization. So it was not a specific incident-driven activity. And it was born out of our safety culture, which I kind of talked about in the speech as well. As far as the updates in technology, our policy talks about not only hands-free but handheld, and it talks about as well any other communication device. So it kind of looked forward as well. I wouldn't say we had the crystal ball to see what was coming down the road, but it was looking forward to other devices that could be a source of distraction beyond just talking on the telephone. We addressed taking messages, reading messages as well. So we've not made any changes to the policy since 2004, and we still feel that it's alive and vibrant and active every day.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Karen Puckett. I'm the Director of Workplace Safety with the Texas Department of Insurance Division of Workers' Compensation. And we've been talking a lot about employer liability and the public safety issues, but I just wanted to point out that transportation incidents are the leading cause of work-related fatalities nationwide and in Texas. In 2012, 536 employees did not go home at the end of the day. They were killed on the job. 238 of those, or 49%, were transportation incidents. So this discussion about the policy is important from a public safety standpoint, but it's also very important and real to you as employers, because there are a lot of costs associated with work-related injuries and fatalities outside of the human life issues, but there are a lot of costs to you as an employer when somebody gets hurt on the job outside of the liability, whatever you might have to pay in legal costs. You've got production downtime, you've got materials, equipment, fleets, lots of things that could be damaged in the process. So one of the challenges is that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which has the enforcement authority for occupational safety here in Texas, they do not have jurisdiction over roadway crashes. And so when they're investigating fatalities, they're not looking at these roadway crashes. If they're investigating a transportation incident, it's either on a private property off of the roadway. So they're outside of the laws that our peace officers enforce for the drivers themselves. There's very little legislation or regulation, I should say, that pertains to the employer itself in terms of making sure your employees are driving safely on the road. There was an allusion to the general duty clause of OSHA, but they're not investigating all of these fatalities that are happening on roadways when it comes to an employee being killed.
Does anyone up here want to weigh in on that at all? Okay. Next question.
My name is Patrick Monroe Patterson. I'm a highway safety intern from the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. And my question seems to be posed to more so of everyone, really, because what we've learned here is that distracted driving is not something that you can multitask on. You either have to drive or focus on talking on your phone and looking over to the side. But every time I look at the brochure of a new car, or whether it be a BMW or an entry-level type of Ford, so to speak, there's always this feature of now you have this hands-free radio, or hands-free phone, or hands-free any type of technology. How can you approach the industry into changing that type of perspective now that we know that hands-free isn't as effective as one once thought it was?
That's a great question, thank you, and it's a huge struggle for us, those of us who are working in this field. If you remember my introduction, I've worked for the auto industry for 20 years in Michigan. I have a lot of friends at the auto companies, and in fact, several of them were at my son's funeral 10 years ago. The auto companies are, in my opinion, the best marketers in the world. They give people exactly what they want, and we've been enamored with being connected, for the last 10 years, and I think they're kind of in an arms race to keep us connected. There have been a few, very few, 3 maybe, studies that have not found the same cognitive effect that you've heard us talk about today, and the auto industry has kind of latched onto those 3 studies. Now, I think if you look at them closely, they're significantly limited and significantly flawed studies. But nonetheless, it gives them the opportunity to say that the science is unsettled, and that's really what they're kind of saying on this, even though I think probably about 90% of the science is pretty clear. So they've got customers walking in and saying, we alluded to this earlier, I don't want anyone else updating Facebook while driving, but if you can give me a way to do it hands-free, and of course, if you allow me to do it, then you must be telling me it's safe. If you can do that, I'm a better multitasker than anybody else. I'd like to at least come into your showroom and look at your car, and that's indeed what's happening. They're coming in showrooms and they're saying that's why. It's a very, very scary situation because we're moving very quickly down this road, and in my opinion, we're starting to normalize a very dangerous practice. We've done some recent research, and people believe that if the car companies are putting it in the car, it must be safe. Now, it's kind of hard for me to understand why people would believe that after some of the things that have been in the news, especially the last couple of months. But anyway, it's a challenge. We remember I said earlier there's no bad guys in this story. If there's an exception to that, it might be the auto industry at this point. They've been very, very entrenched in the fact that as long as their mantra is, as long as your eyes are on the road and your hands are on the wheel, you're a safe driver. And we believe strongly that that evidence has been debunked. Todd gets in front of a jury, he can quickly discredit that. It's a very dangerous path. The consumer electronics industry is pretty much in the same boat with the auto industry. As some of you know, Apple introduced a new technology that's going to be in Mercedes-Benz products next year called CarPlay. The name just makes me shudder, but it's the ability, using a heads-up display on the windshield, eyes on the road supposedly, even though you're looking at the windshield, to be able to do anything in the car that you can do on your iPhone hands-free. I just saw a report, I think Jennifer read it on the way over. We just saw a news report that now Google has a response to Apple's CarPlay. They're coming out with something like that. It's a very, very dangerous path we're on. Todd?
And what ultimately is going to happen, folks, is y'all remember we talked about what motivated jurors? Capitalism is the greatest thing that ever existed. That's why we're all here. That's why we live in the greatest country and the greatest state in the Union. And I mean that without any question at all. But there has to be safety limits on capitalism. Right now, the automakers have no safety limits on their capitalism. In fact, one of the interesting things, and Jennifer turned me on to this early on, is y'all remember where it used to be that you had to have a Mercedes or a Lexus or a BMW to have all these cool toys in your car? Ford pioneered the exact opposite. They figured out if they put the really cool toys in their entry-level cars, the teens would buy their cars regardless of whether they were very great cars or not. And that's what we've got. We've got smart cars. And the interesting thing is that there has not been that next generation of lawsuits against the manufacturers to say, you knew better. That's why, obviously, in the car, when it's directed to the driver, there is no excuse for saying it's okay. There just isn't. And that's what's going to be the ultimate telling in this case, is when the public is faced with the decision of, is it safe to put smart cars out there? Is that the safety line we want to draw for our society? If the answer is yes, then we're just going to get more and more. If the answer is no, then it's going to stop. And that's what's going to stop it, because capitalism is not going to stop it until we create a disincentive for this to continue.
Any more questions? We'll take in the back first. You. Yeah. Hi, Scott.
Private study group with the City of Austin. And a couple comments and then a question. So my question to AT&T earlier was not to put you on trial, or you haven't done enough, or won't do enough in the future. And I don't know if that was your response, was directed towards me. So let's talk after this meeting. I'm well aware that they can wait in an opportunity, and I've gone to some of those events, and it's great, but the text messaging while driving is only an initial step. It's not a step that is near as comprehensive as handheld ban or farther. So we need to keep that into perspective. Text messaging is only one part of it. The second comment is that one of the challenges that I want to know, maybe you all know, is that of the 26 bans on text messaging, web surfing throughout the state of Texas, how many of those were initiated by individuals who had tragedy in their life? How many by nonprofits? Or how many by businesses or governmental entities? And finally, another question is, do business associations sometimes lose control of knowing what that association is in favor of or against, and may not be able to control that aspect of it, even though they can control their own internal operations, outreach to elected officials.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay, good. No, I didn't take it as an attack at all, so don't worry about it. But I will say I'm with you. Texting while driving is just one piece of the issue, and it's where the It Can Wait campaign is focused. And we partnered with groups like TxDOT and some other nonprofit organizations to really kind of find what was the dire cause, and some of our research led us to the initial campaign focus of texting while driving. You know, for example, we learned that texting is involved in over 200,000 traffic incidences each year, all totally preventable, as are texting while driving. So that's our campaign focus. We obviously participate in events like this, and like I said, we support the statewide ban that Representative Craddock is going after, but yeah, that's all. I agree with you. That's all.
Go ahead.
Albert Stevens. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I want to thank these big corporations for jumping on the cause and help organizations like TxDOT and our organization to educate consumers. So that's a great step, having large corporations. Social responsibility, that's what it boils down to. Before my class, I was an engineer. I create stuff, I make stuff. Cars today, they're more comfortable than our living rooms. Really are more comfortable than our living rooms. So we're not really driving, we just drive comfortably. I believe that as a corporation, big government corporations have a huge responsibility, social responsibility. Instead of taking away the responsibility from the driver, we make the driver our guard. The driver today doesn't have to, the only thing he has to do is drive and look forward. Doesn't even have to look back anymore. What's the problem? Going back and look. We're taking that responsibility away from the driver. And that's one of the things that is happening to us as drivers. The new drivers don't feel like they're responsible for anybody else, as long as they are protected. So I welcome every single corporation here today to join our efforts to make the roads safer for everyone, not just for the automobiles. I haven't heard anybody talking about pedestrians or cyclists. Those are road users as well. Cycling is a legitimate mode of transportation that also needs to be protected. Thank you.
I'll ask a question. Wanted to open it up for the panel. What happens if you have an employee that violates the policy that you have in place? How do you handle that?
With us, if the employee violates the policy, they're put on probation. If it happens again, then it's termination.
Have you had a lot of those? Or any?
Have we had a lot? I mean, if you look at, we've maybe had 4 employees. It's a tough thing too, because it's like I said, it's one thing to put it in place. It's the other thing to get your management or your managers to enforce it, especially when you're enforcing something you're guilty of. And I think that's a big challenge. But yeah, we do enforce it for sure. Yes.
And just from ExxonMobil's perspective, there is disciplinary action. We make that clear in our policy worldwide. Recognizing individuals, if they're involved in an accident, we're going to look at their records. As we also encourage on the proactive front, though, for our leaders to engage when they are riding with their employees on a sales call, to reinforce the appropriate behaviors. When they're talking with them on the phone from the head office, to listen for those auditory clues. Or, hey, you're not driving, are you, while we're talking about this? Just to reinforce that as well. Take every opportunity to reinforce and model the appropriate behavior, not focus on, hey, I'm trying to catch you talking on the cell phone, so I'm gonna see which territory manager I can call today and try and catch. That's not the intent. It's trying to coach and model on the appropriate behavior.
Did you?
I think enforcement and discipline and all that's a direct relation to how well you implement the policy. And I think it's if some of you got really motivated today and excited about what you heard, and you went back tomorrow and you wrote a memo and said, we now have a distracted driving policy, we aren't going to use phones anymore, I think that's probably a mistake. I think you need to bring people along, you need to educate them, you need to share some stories, you need to share the impact. And I think if you do it that way, enforcement doesn't become as big a deal. Let me just give you one example I heard recently I liked. Owens Corning, an international company headquartered in Toledo, Ohio, decided, like these companies have, to put in a worldwide policy. When they announced it to their employees, it's something they had been working on for, I think, over a year. And they had all the business groups sit down and say, okay, what impact will this have on our business? What changes do we need to make to accommodate it? In some cases, like you mentioned, they had to spend capital. They had to change dispatching systems and so forth. And then when they announced it to their employees in a worldwide meeting, the CEO said, effective 90 days ago, I made the decision to stop using my cell phone for any reason, any way, shape, or form. I haven't used the cell phone at all while driving during that time. And I got to tell you, if I can do it, anyone in this company can do it. And I thought that was a wonderful example of executive leadership. There's lots of stories like that out there, and I think if you kind of partner with each other, talk to these folks, get on our website, you can get ideas for how you can put these policies in. And then I don't want to say you don't need to worry about enforcement, but enforcement becomes a much smaller issue.
I do know that a violation of that policy is eligible for disciplinary action, but I'm sorry, I don't know the exact HR policy. But I will say that all of our fleet has to go through regular defensive driving training, and we've integrated this ban and education around the ban, and even kind of testing and driving, studies and visits with supervisors, kind of as a way to educate our employees to kind of further drive home the message.
Any other questions? See one here.
Two-part question. Do you think that it would help by making distracted driving a health issue? That's my first question. Because it could be hazardous to your health. My second question is, insurance companies. Has there been any talk about them denying any kind of claims if there is a distracted driving involved?
That is a two-part. Who wants to take the health issue first?
Well, I can say that's how we approached it from our own personal perspective. We took a personal approach to start with. This was in your interest of your own personal health and safety. So that we brought to them the statistics. We went to National Safety Council, partnered with them on their studies, gathered. We're a company of engineers and scientists and technology, so people want to see the statistics and understand the background as well, but we had to take it down to a personal level as well, and that's really where we thought the benefit was and how people were really able to grasp this, make it personal. What's it mean to my health and livelihood?
And the insurance?
And I can address the insurance. Okay. Insurance, no, you're not going to get denied insurance if your employee's distracted driving. That's not going to happen. That's what you buy it for, just like you buy it for somebody speeding or following too closely or whatever. Again, remember the punitive aspect. But you just pointed out something that I guarantee you Dave's been wanting to happen for a long time and have worked hard to see happen. This thing needs to be hit in a variety of ways. Raising the health issue to the employees. Hey, do you want to go home at night? Those kinds of questions are big. Insurance companies, again, could put pressure on employers. From an underwriting standpoint, to raise their premium if they do not have an effective ban in place. They do it every day. And we're hoping to see more and more of that because, again, this is a bottom line business. America's capitalism. And you've got to find the pressure points. Dave can tell you, I don't know to what degree the insurance companies are using the pressure points that we would like them to use. What's going on in that regard?
Well, some insurance companies are taking a lead, others maybe not so much. What I was told is that insurance companies tend to be like, ExxonMobil's a bunch of engineers, insurance companies are a bunch of actuaries, which means they're always looking backwards. My understanding is there's only been one example ever of insurance companies issuing a rate break on a new technology and that was anti-lock brakes. That's the only time it's ever been done. Generally, they wait to see an impact of changed behavior and then look at rate breaks, which, kind of makes sense. But the insurance industry is very engaged in this issue. They know the dangers, they understand the dangers, and they're coming along quick on it. So the vast majority of large companies, though, as you pointed out, are self-insured. And those that aren't, they're individually underwritten. So everyone is underwritten by their experience, on an annual or biannual basis. So this is a huge cost impact for them by putting these policies in place.
Any more questions? We're about to wrap up.
I think we're ready.
Okay.
I just first and foremost want to thank Erica and the panel for the questions and answer period. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.